So fair enough. So welcome. It looks like that couple minutes gave a couple more people time to filter into the room. I'm going to turn it over to John, but I actually just would like to introduce him, if you don't mind. So with us today is John Burns, and John will be sharing his expertise on building resilience and managing risk for your business. John has worked for the Canadian federal government for a number of entities, primarily in economic and management review areas. And when he left the government, he became partner at Ernst Young with national responsibility for value-for-money audit, program evaluation, and change management and information audit. So John comes to us with a wealth of experience. And in chatting with him over more than a year now, actually, I've come to realize that many of his skill set and experience translates extremely well to our small business community. And with that in mind, we thought it would be appropriate for the Small Business Enterprise Center at the City of St. Catharines to invite John and tap into his expertise about how you might cope and adjust in the middle of a pandemic. And I don't want to do the presentation, so John, I'm going to turn it back over to you and allow you to go from there. I hope I didn't miss anything important from your past. It's hard to summarize such a...
Yeah, no, that's quite okay. Now, I want to be able to play off my screen, the thing. Do I press share screen?
Yes, yeah, you should see share screen, and then you'll be able to choose the PowerPoint.
Oh, looks as though it's got a lot of my junk on there.
There we are.
Okay, well, you don't need to see.
Yeah, we see your notes.
Email.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't need to see my messy files. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that these were all here.
What I see is the just the PowerPoint, John, but I see the 14 slides to the left and the notes on the bottom.
Okay. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I didn't mean to show the notes, but I need to see them. Well, let me start. Let me just one more adjustment here.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so the theme here is, even during a pandemic, as bad as it is, I would maintain that there's an opportunity, or can be an opportunity, to cut out a particular part of your business, improve it, ride out the storm however long it will last, and then on the other end, have this same, let's call it improved process, continuing to operate sustained operation and do so on a self-sustained basis. I need to make a couple of points just before I get to the, if you will, the meat of the problem. I don't really know any of you individually or your particular situations. What I'm doing this on is the experience that I've had through literally hundreds of assignments in a wide variety of areas. What I'm saying here represents my own views, not necessarily those of either the Enterprise Center or the province of Ontario. And what I've tried to do is to focus on what I think are sort of sustained, dependable lessons or experiences in the that I and others have had in the private sector. I kind of see us in the same situation. In the best of times, if you're operating your business, it's dynamic, variable, surprising, and I always felt that what I was doing was kind of juggling 6 or 7 balls up in the air. You want to look at your competitors, you want to look at your customers, you want to look at your supply chains, you got to look at your capital, and unless you have a big staff that's looking individually at each one of those, then you're, as a small entrepreneur, small to medium-sized business, juggling all of those on your own. To me, that was the thrill of the whole thing, was being able to, I don't know, juggle and never be bored, always be exhausted, try to balance all of those things. It's now kind of a tale of two cities. That was the best of times. We're now obviously in the worst of times. What's going to happen? Are you going to have the same customers? Are you going to interact with them in the same way? Are you going to have new competitors or entrants? Is the supply chain going to change? Is there going to be the same technology that you're going to depend on? We could talk all afternoon about those, and we don't need to go into any detail there. But to me, most of the people that I see now are, first of all, protecting their assets. How's your cash flow? We always would advise clients to have between 4 to 6 months of working capital on hand. How liquid are you? How liquid can you be? Did you have 4 or 6 months, or were you playing it closer to your vest? How are you going to keep the clients, customers that you already have? What are you going to do about your employees if you have them? And how are you going to beat the competition? All of those, I assume, any business for the last 60, 90 days would have tried to have consolidated. The second thing is, so how are you going to survive in the longer term? There's a number of ways of looking at this. I'll just roughly or quickly talk about 3. One of them is scenario planning. This is a process that's probably used by about 2/3, 3/4 of companies. And basically what it is, usually part of a strategic plan or long-term plan, you're trying to spend time figuring out what the future will look like and what are the various scenarios. In the notes, I've listed a number of, if you want to read further on that, ways of getting into more detail. The second, similar to the first, but it's more recently become topical and used, is risk management. Part of my practice was developing risk modules. We used to call them heat maps for companies or divisions within companies. And basically what you do is you label the number of risks to the success of your ongoing success of your company. And you say, are those risks likely to happen, very likely to happen, or very much going to happen? On the other hand, then you take a look at the impacts. If something has a low probability of happening, but it has a huge impact, that gets treated in a different way than something that has a high probability of happening, but a very low impact. I don't have a picture of it here, but there's very cute pictures. Again, you can look at some of the notes, and you'll see most of them around a heat map. So on one axis, you'll have the risks, the probability, the other, the impacts, and then the cells define where you're going to work on your mitigation strategies.
And John, if I may, those notes are notes that we can share with the audience after, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And they're not proprietary. They're actually meant for me. So you'll have to excuse the typos, but they have what you need in it. If I were writing a book, so everybody's going to have some little thing that they're going to do during this pandemic, writing books, writing songs, blah. For me, that went out about 15, 20 days into it. I said, I don't have that, which leads me to probably, to me anyway, the most important part of organizations and how they survive pandemics or shocks, which is currently the most common label is a resilient organization. How do you make it? Disasters or shock to the organizations occur very frequently. How do you build within your organization a culture of resilience to bring in, incorporate what the shocks are going to be, spread around the organization or outside the organization, the knowledge that you have and they have, and share that, put it into some kind of a usable package, if you were, and be able then to quickly, agility is another part of this. Some also call it a learning organization. How does an organization learn from each other, from its environment? And you can see successful versus unsuccessful organizations because they're able to be resilient, agile, or learning organization.
Right.
Those are the sort of kinds of things that I would expect people who are trying to survive this pandemic are doing, and juggling and doing it at an ever faster rate with ever increasing number of unknowns. But even in all that turmoil, I think, and this is the point of my session, I think you can carve out a little bit of time, or you should carve out, or you might want to consider carving out a little bit of time to say, well, okay, fine, I've got those 6 or 7 balls up in the air and it's moving, I'm handling it as well as I'm going to, but maybe I can slice off a little bit, and when we come out the other side, we'll be at least in that one little bit better. The way that we usually do it is to say, well, take a look at your organization. There's a bunch of different ways of doing it. One of the most common, and this is a bird's eye view, is what people call a balanced scorecard generally. But what they do is to say, almost all organizations, regardless of size, and I've tried to make this sort of scalable from if it's a one-person organization to this particular model I've used on small organizations, but also on organizations in the tens of thousands of people. You've got 4 different functions. Financial, you've got to worry about your customers or your clients separate from financial. You've got to worry about, and HR sometimes calls HR. We always looked at it as learning and growth, but human resources. How do you develop, retain your human resources? And for the purpose of us today, not that those other ones also couldn't be used as ways of getting at a particular process to improve, then you have your internal processes. How do you get supplies into your place? How do you manage them when it's at your place? How do you get them out to the customers? So what we did was, for each of these different areas, we're looking for the metrics of how well you're doing. Your internal finance is pretty easy. What's your profit and loss? But there's more detail there that you could get into. Customers, how satisfied are they? And are they continuing to, like, are you getting new customers? Is it repeat customers? Tell us about the different systems and processes that you have in each of these fairly distinct and very complete 4 areas. The simplest way to figure out the process that you might want to pick to improve, typically the most powerful way of doing it is to take a look at benchmarks. So you and your firm or business, how are you doing benchmarking yourself against last year? How are you doing benchmarking yourself against your competitors? Can't always get that information, but you have to one way or the other get some kind of an idea of not how only your metrics stand up, but how they do relative to your competition. Sometimes you can get that from industry trends. Sometimes you can get that from trade associations. Many trade associations will, for that line of business, say, here's the cycle time for this particular process, or here's the number of errors or number of problems in the product at the end of the day that were produced. And you can compare then your numbers or metrics with theirs. Obviously, if your numbers are worse than theirs or they're deteriorating, then that might be the process that you would take a look at.
Right. You know, one of the most successful retailers I know, John, he has been very successful in retail, and he attributes it to benchmarking. And it really surprised me, but he says every month he's looking at last month's sales versus this month's, projecting the next. And now that he's been in business 10 years, he looks at how did I do last year and the year before, and uses it to predict the following year. And yeah, he also checks Industry Canada data that's out there as well. But it is tougher to find what your competitors are doing. But he benchmarks against himself and his own sales, and so it's interesting to hear you speak about that as well. It just reminded me of that. So
it's a surprisingly simple, powerful tool for figuring out what you're screwing up, or what you need to be worked at. And there's not any organization that, maybe this is not right, most organizations do some kind of benchmarking, implicit or explicit. And there's a whole sort of set of, here's how you do benchmarks, here's the kind of benchmarks. And I don't want to go into that, but in detail, but that's a way of quickly, within sort of one of your 4 areas here, of saying, maybe this is a problem that we should work at. Again, realizing that you're juggling 6 or 8 balls in the air, and you got to keep those going. Actually, another, and we found the simplest way of doing it, is just hang around the boardroom, coffee table, and ask people who know about the business, and you have to have an open discussion, but it generally goes along the lines when you get down to, well, we're being serious here. So how do you think we're doing on this process? Do you think that there's room for improvement? Do you think it's about as good as it's ever going to be? Do you take a look at improving different, have people taken a look at improving different parts? And you can tell pretty quickly, and you can gain consensus by going to more than just one person, as to what's working and what's not. Go to the customers and ask them, like, how do you think our processes are working? So that's to try and funnel down to a process or a thing that you're gonna look at. That's what I want to turn to now. And the general term for this is process reengineering. There's a number of similar sorts of names to it. It's been around for decades. It's been worked on, it's been improved. And I think what I'm trying to do here is to give you the, if you will, overview of the lessons learned in very short form. So the first thing is just block. So you've done all of this sort of clearing away the flotsam and the jetsam, and block off the process. And literally what we will do is to say, within this block, this is the process that we're looking at. Here's the first step, and I'll give you an example of how we did it in a slide or two. But here's the first part of the process, second, third, fourth, here's the beginning, here's the end. Here's not what we're gonna do, here's not what we're gonna do, it's just this. So you wanna really focus on that, only that process. At the end of the day, we found one way or the other, there's 10 different tools that can be applied to this, if you will, boxed in process. And I'll mention, you can interpret this for perhaps you have in your own minds a process of your own that you'd like to take a look at. But the first one is bureaucracy elimination. Sometimes you could call it duplication elimination. Are you doing the same thing twice? Is the step that, you know, it goes from Joe to Mary, and Mary checks what Joe has done, like, is that just excess bureaucracy? Why was that done? One example, and this isn't a story out of school, but it's a real unfortunate one. 4 purchases that were made in a government department. This goes back to when I was working for the Auditor General. For purchases that were made in Nova Scotia, all government, you have to have authorization to purchase that thing. Somebody separate has to say, well, yeah, the money is there. And once the thing is delivered, then somebody has to say, yeah, we got it. And that's the nub of from start to finish. But after that, there was another group in the Atlantic province that reviewed that whole process. Was each part of it done? And then there was at the regional level in all of the Atlantic provinces, another group or individual that looked at that same 3-step process. Then there was another one in Ottawa, and then another one, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, there was 7 steps after the first group said, yeah, this is the right thing. It was delivered, we had the money, and it was paid for. 7 other so duplication, bureaucracy, whatever. On almost any organization that's been around for a while and has a number of steps or people in it will have some problems here. Smaller, newer organizations, they don't really have that problem. Indirectly, one of my clients was head of AT&T. One of the things that he said was that as soon as somebody on his senior staff started to write a manual of what it was that they were doing, he said it's time for that guy to move on, because writing the manual, few people are going to read it. If you have time to write it, then you're not doing the, anyway, that was his view of bureaucracy. I want to spend a little time on value-added assessment. There's each activity, each step along that process. The question we've looked at duplication and bureaucracy, fine. Then you want to take a look at each step and say, did that step add value? Because if it didn't, then why are we doing it? But if it did, then what is the value that you added? And we differentiate or divide it into two. The first most important one is value to the client. If that activity doesn't add value to the client, for example, that the client is willing to pay for, then you have to ask, why are you doing it? Maybe, and this is the other and the only other serious value added, is it's for the organization. I am, and the client doesn't care, but I'm going to have to send a copy of this to accounting, or I'm going to have to check with HR, or I'm going to have to send another copy to the, or go to another part of either my organization, or if it's a small organization, then you need to retain records, you need to retain some knowledge, you need to continue to learn about the thing. So it may well be that the value is not to the client, but to the organization. Fine. Those are the only two value adds that you're going to want to allow in a process that has been made to be efficient and effective. Some of these other ones, and I'll come back to this in my example, just simplifying each step, making it as clear and as simple as is possible. The longer word is process cycle time reduction. Like, how long does it take you to start and finish something? Error proofing, it's always interesting to me. It's always interesting to find out why errors occur. And they always occur for a good reason. Nobody makes them up. I mean, they occur because the instructions were unclear, because the people who received the instructions was untrained, because it was such a complex thing that was all put in one big lump that people couldn't do it. So maybe you could standardize it, the next point, and make it always the same way. So people learned how to, oh yeah, we did it the same way last time, we're doing it the same way now. It's clear, and if we have a problem at this step, then maybe I don't know how to do it, but maybe if somebody else has the same standard approach. I just ask them, hey, listen, how do I handle this particular step? I don't know whether it's A or B. Oh yeah, well, we always do it A. And so then you can more simply streamline, so to speak, your process. So supplier partnerships also, one way or the other, most or all businesses are on some kind of a supply chain, and you want that to move smoothly from one stage to the next. And we can all think in this pandemic mode that we're in, you've got, I don't know all the different words, but you've got the, one piece of equipment, but you don't have the other. So like for the tests, you got the thing that sticks up your nose, but you don't have the, the holder to hold the thing that's stuck up. I'm making this up, but you get the point. Like you want that supply chain to work. You want it to know that it's going to work, and it's up to you to make your part of the chain work well, and you do so by some kind of a partnership. Hey, if you bring it in on a Friday night and it's going to sit in storage over the weekend, then I've got to keep it cool, or I've got to guard it, but if you bring it in Monday morning, then can you bring it in Monday morning? That sort of thing. Anyway, you can think of other reasons. I want to say two other things. There's actually 12 steps. I'm going to drop the last two. What this is designed to do, these 10, and again in that sequence, is, and somewhere in these slides I've said, and I think there's no exceptions to this, that anytime we've gone into an organization, we've been able to improve the cost structure by 10%. We've been generally able to improve client satisfaction. We've generally been able to improve the morale of the group. But you get about cost-wise 10 or 15%. We also insisted that it be continuing. Like anybody can go in and the Hawthorne effect experiments showed this very well, where people would come in and they would say, well, how can we increase the productivity? We'll screw around with the lights, and the productivity went up. And then 3 months later, it went back to where it was before. That's not the improvement you want. What you want is, will the improvement that you've designed into the new system, will it stay that way? And more importantly, and this goes back to the resilience of the organization, not only is it self-sustaining, but is it self-improving? So you want to go in, improve something, not only when you're there, but after you're there, and you want to leave it so that the organization is more, agile, resilient, inquisitive, more of a learning organization that always is self-improving. Another strategy for another day, we're not talking about that. But if you want to get a 25%, this is also what we're not going to talk about today. You can easily get 25% by sort of a big picture. Like, let's just not do any of the thing that we're doing now this way. Let's do it entirely differently. And you do none of these steps, and you spend little or no time in this. You spend time doing a different process or a different approach. We're not going to talk about that today. The other last thing that we're not going to talk about is, and also the last step, always after, and this is now back to the, sort of 10% improvement, always the last step is IT. By last step being IT, I mean design your system the way that it should be, in the ways that we've talked about here, and then automate. Don't say, well, we can make everything that we've got now go faster if we just buy a machine, and generally you can, but you want to not do it that way. You want to do it in the sequence that we've listed here, and then think about automation. That's not to say that IT shouldn't be part of the process improvement team right from the start. It's just once it's improved. Okay, so I want to give you an example of an assignment that we did. I have prettier graphs, but I wasn't able to obtain permission from the client to do them. So you'll have to, I apologize, stick with my notes. Briefly, what we did, as I've mentioned before, is box the process out. Like, what are we talking about? What are we not talking about? Almost always you do that with some kind of a flow chart. And we went through, and I'm going to repeat what I said before. Reduce duplication, focused on simplification, cycle time reduction, standardization. Let me just, you can keep that in the back of your mind. And I'm sorry if this is my like little, scratching. So I apologize for that. This is a private company. It's a private company. Basically, they're certifying, and I'll make it sufficiently general, you won't be able to figure out who it is. They're certifying things that are applied, that the outside clients have asked for. So these outside clients, I'll just go through the process. These outside clients, I didn't even know if you can read it, but there's basically 5 different groups, and there was about 5,000 applications per year that came into the organization. So this is all the inside the organization steps. The first step was kind of an initial screening. And they had 3 screeners that would, open the mail or get it on fax or get it electronically. And they would look at what the client had filled out and just do a quick sort of process. You may have seen that same sort of thing that the passport people do. They do a real quick, have you checked all of the boxes? Did you forget one box? Because they know that when it goes to the next step, if you haven't checked the box where you've got the blah, 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 it'll have to go back. So these screeners, on average, returned about 10% back to the client because it wasn't filled out correctly. Once it was filled out correctly, the screeners send it to the verifiers. So they would look at each item of and maybe it was a 4-page thing or a bit longer maybe. And the verifier would check each one of the little boxes to see that the information was correct, that it was verifiable. we found, I'll get back to this, but verifier 1 and 2, about 10% of the ones that the screener said were okay, they sent back to the client and said, we've reviewed your thing, you're going to have to fill in the following thing. The client then sent it to the screener again, who screened to see whether it was done. And then the screener sent it to the verifier. And then it went through, and the rest of it was, okay, fine, final certification. Even then, about 1% of the things were done. And then after it was certified, it was given to, I don't know, like let's call them the mail back out. So the certificate was sent, which the clients needed in order to do their business. But even then, about 3% were returned because the address was wrong, or the name was wrong, or something had changed. Turned out that verifier 3 had 0 back to the client. And this came out later, but how come you have 0 and verifier 2 and 1 have 10%? And verifier 3 said, oh, well, like I've been at this for such a long time, and I know Joe at, company X. So I just called Joe up and say, hey, you did it again. You forgot, box 3. What is it? Oh yeah, it's like blah, blah, blah. Can you give me the information? Got it. And verifier 3 could process the same number of applications with a degree of complexity, but with, we'll call it 0 errors, or 0 that had to be filled in. Verifier 1, 2, and 3 were sitting like right next to each other and didn't know that these were happening. So the firm had a target set up, 30 days for the initial screening, 60 days for the completion of 100% of the detailed, and 90 days for the final. The firm didn't have the metrics. It turned out that to get to 100% of the initial screening took 60 days. To get the detailed, it took 90 days to get to 100%. And the actual final back to the client was about 120 days. So you can see this is like shooting fish in a barrel. Not really. But if you distill it all down, that's pretty much the way that all of the process improvement assignments that I've done have turned out. If you box it off, you take enough time, you do it in a sequenced manner, then you're going to get anomalies, you're going to get things that just don't make sense, that when you check back, it's there. Whoop. Skipped ahead too far.
John, I'll just take that opportunity. We're about 10 to 2, but I just double checked. The room is, our room is clear past 2, which we share this resource of this channel, so we're okay still. And looks like you're in the home stretch too. So
yeah. So you can read all of this. I've got the slides slightly out of order, but before there was a whole group of problems. One of the client groups was threatening to leave because the company's costs were too high, and the response time was too slow. There was different forms for different groups. There was no backup plan for the screeners, and there was no HR plan. If somebody's away, stuff just piled up on their desk. And then that came back and there was a big pile in it. So we put together a performance improvement team that comprised different parts of the system. And after 60 days, I'll just focus on a couple of things. There was a whole lot better teamwork. People knew what each part of the process was and what the problems were. The clients knew that they were sending stuff that wasn't incomplete and it was costing them and other people. So they did their work better. They developed a common form for all of the clients. So it made it easier after there was some training. Within 6 months, the overall error rate was reduced by 50 months. And let me just jump to the, so the cost was reduced, improved group sort of resilience. And we went back a year later and they had reached their stretch goal. That in a nutshell is what I wanted to say, but I'm going to leave you with one other thing, two other things.
Yeah, well, there's still lots of time, John. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. How much time do you think I have?
15 minutes.
Great.
And then there might be a couple questions too.
Yeah, I'll take half that. So there's a lot of experience built up with this re-engineering. And a lot of lessons that have been learned and relearned, and it's refined to a fair amount. In part, those lessons have been informed by a question that people early on asked: is it going to work? Is it going to achieve our objective? Is it going to have a sustained self-improved improvement in cost and other things? In theory, it does. In practice, not so much in the early days. And to take a look at that, we did a study of about 100 companies that said, did you have the right design or the right strategy? And 95% said, yep. Then we said, well, did it work? Did you meet all of the objectives, human and technical, time, money? And the answer was no, 5%. I'm sorry, I've jumped ahead a little bit. Did you have the right strategy? 95% said yes. Did you have the right strategy? Only 5% said no, like it was, the design was wrong. Did it work? Well, 5% said yeah, and 95% said no. So what we did was we focused on why that 5% was different than the other quadrants. So there's a number of reasons for that. The first one was you can't just improve a process without a sort of a project management team approach for a number of reasons that are self-evident once you get into it. You need a multi-capability team that'll be responsible and given responsibility and the authority and tools, and also have the mindset to do things differently. That team becomes a critical, probably the most critical part of making it work. Second is you want to, so the process is up and it's running, it's blah, blah, blah. You want to assign the responsibility to someone or some group. Sometimes it's the team, sometimes it's an individual, for managing that process. You want to give them the authority, the accountability, and resources. And you want to hold them to account. You want to manage that. And this is for firms of any size. If it's even a single person firm, then what you want to do, to me, would be set aside a specific time, even if it's like a quarter of an hour or so, at periodic times, to take a look back and say, we designed it this way, it was supposed to work this way. Is it actually working this way? I'll leave you with a quick other couple of points. If you're looking at how the process is managed, there's 5 different elements, and you want to assess the degree to which those elements are done well. Is it designed well? Are the people who are doing it, are they competent? Is the owner, the person responsible for it? What are they doing? Do you have the proper infrastructure? This now too would obviously include IT. And do you have good process metrics? Are they collected? Are they accurate? Are they being used to modify? So that's really, in a nutshell, the gist of, you got a process, box it off, here's a sequence of steps. You want to make sure that it's sustained and self-improving, have a team put together to design, but also separately give somebody authority and responsibility and check to see that they are sure that it's working. And this is for like a one person up to, it's scalable. So that's really it. So I was going to ask, and you should ask, maybe you have, like, do you have a candidate process? Like, would it make a difference if it was re-engineered? And would it be successful? And again, anybody can go in and in the time that they're there, make it look as though there's improvements, even just because everybody's like fluttering around. Does it stay and does it continue to improve? Both time, money, frustration, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, do you have time for, if there are any questions about this, John? Do you have a couple minutes to stick around for a couple questions, if there are any? I was really perfect, wonderful. I really liked how at a few different points you talked about involving the customer and client. And in your example, I think I noted that that the customer should be a part of the process improvement. And I thought that was a really great point. And like you say, even if there's only a couple of the people on this call are just one person operations, so who better to involve than your customer and say, how is the process when I'm serving you or delivering my product to you? So I really encourage people to think along those lines. And,
yeah.
and I noticed on, I think it was slide 5, when you were talking about the balanced scorecard, and people can read about it more in your notes. You started by talking about the customer as well. So to me, that really reinforced something that Adrienne and I often talk about with our own clients, is start with your client in mind if you want to succeed. So I want to thank you for including that, or I was glad to see that included in some of the best practices you're talking about.
Yeah, it's critical, and surprisingly easy to get really good information out of clients.
Yes, absolutely. Well, they if they're dealing with you, they've chosen your business for a reason, and they would have a vested interest in seeing you continue to succeed as a business owner.
Yes, and we did a client survey one time and found out that 10% of the clients were at the verge of leaving. So you get I mean, it's business development too, when you're doing that sort of thing. Hey,
Right.
we can improve. Well, yeah, like do whatever, but I'm not coming back here again. Well, okay, that's fine. But why is that? Well, you cost more, you're slower, and you're rude. Well, whatever. Yeah.
Right. So there is a question you had, I don't recall which slide, but in one of the slides, so the question is around error proofing. You talked about tools. Okay, I'm just looking at my copy of the slides, and you talked about tools conducted in sequence, and you talk about error proofing. So how does a small service-based business error proof or reduce errors? How would you break that down?
Well, errors are always made for what I would think of as really good reasons. I think people are mature adults making decisions the best that they can. And if they make an error, in your view, then you should be asking why that error was made. In the case that we're talking about here, error proofing started with the customer. Like don't put something down. Like don't just slop through it. Fill everything out. 10% of the people didn't fill everything out. So to me, that was an error that I'm not sure that I want to say blame the customer, but I would blame the customer. Like you just didn't take the time to fill it out right. Well, maybe, and indeed it turned out that the form wasn't overly clear. Like everybody of those, like everybody, most of the 10% were making the same error. So then probably it's not the customer, it's probably you who have designed the form, or you who have incorrectly, or you who have not trained customers that well, or your instructions aren't that good. So the first step is make sure that you've identified the errors. Second, how did they occur, and who's responsible? And third, if you've done a decent analysis of, in broad enough analysis there, then you can start to look at error proofing, and you can pretty much figure out if it's working or not. Because if the same errors come up next time, and you thought that you've improved the process, probably you haven't.
Right.
But start with why, and start with why the errors were done.
Perfect. I think we have time for one more question, and I do see one. It's around risk management. You talked early on around risk management, and the question is, if I'm sorry, I should read it. If I'm expecting a second wave of COVID and my business has to shut down again, how do I prepare to manage that risk?
Oh. So that goes well beyond the sort of theory of risk management. I think, well, here's my theory answer to that.
Okay.
What do you think the probability of that is? Is it low? Is it medium? Is it high? My bet is it's low to medium or something like that. And I'm thinking of the Niagara region. I'm not thinking of
Sure.
some of the protests in the States or
Sure.
things like that. So, but it's not low. It is, to me, medium.
Right.
If at that time the severity of it is the same as what the severity was the first time, what is the impact going to be on my business? High, medium, or low? So the questioner can answer that question. So that's the first, like, what's the likelihood of the risk, and what's the the amount of impact. And that's going to be, to me, another survival. Do you have a way of having enough operating capital that you can draw upon to make it through that? Are you going to lose more customers? How can you reduce, like how can you mitigate the losses or the impacts that you had on the first wave by doing something different or better or more in the future? So to me, this is pretty naive, I guess. Like I didn't expect the impact to be that quick and that severe. Comes again, well, and I spent a tremendous amount of time, I mean, as a consultant in the days of SAR, that was just a full employment bill for us consultants saying, well, here's how to mitigate the risk in the future. Not sure how many of those lessons apply or were learned, but so your clients, how many did you lose? How many did you keep? Why did you keep the ones that you had? Was it loyalty? Was it lack of alternatives? Figure out what on the second hit your at that time clients are going to do. The loyal ones, I'd be pretty nice to them between now and the second impact. The ones you're going to lose, I would say, well, and there's a number of strategies that you'd have to get into the details of it. But if you're going to lose clients, then frankly, cut them off as quick as you can, because you don't want to lose your capital. You don't want to use up capital on stuff that's good money after bad. Look, that'd be kind of the way that I would start that analysis.
Okay.
The hell that doesn't happen.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So I think the individual can go back to two priorities that you mentioned, which is protecting the assets and surviving, and then adapting. So, John, with that in mind, I regret that we're going to have to wrap up here. I really want to thank you. You've volunteered your expertise to us, and when we send out the notes, I think everybody who is here with us will find really good value in reviewing those notes as well and applying these lessons to your own individual businesses. So, John, thank you so much for spending the time with us. Time is our enemy, it seems, in every one of these sessions.
It always is. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It's the first time that I've done it, so I can't see anybody's reaction or lack of reaction or whatever. There's stuff that was said here that was helpful or worthwhile or worth pursuing further. And again, I'll apologize in advance. Yeah, it was voluntary. If I were writing a book, I'd straighten up the notes. These are notes that I've included that I've written to myself. So please take them in that in that vein. I don't go in much for correcting typos or repetitos, as long as I get enough of the point. So I hope it was useful, that things that I've said have caused people to think differently about their problems, A, and B, that it makes a difference to them and their ongoing businesses.
Definitely, thank you. So, John, I'd love to chat with you sometime in the coming days or next week, and just talk about how we can keep tapping into your expertise for the benefit of our clients. So, thank you again.
That I appreciate the work and the challenges that you guys have got. On the one hand, on the other hand, you're sitting out in the backyard and it looks as though you got a little bit too much sun. So I'm not sure how sorry I have to feel for you, but maybe I'll try to take a lesson from you and do the same thing myself.
Definitely.
You have at a personal level, your last weekend was good as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we celebrated, you're referring to my wife and I celebrating 19 years, and I'm happy to announce live that she's agreed to stick around for another year. So that's a big victory. So
1 year at a time. That's as good as it gets from my perspective.
absolutely. We have some thank yous and a congratulations, and thank you, Gord, Cassandra, Robin, Adrienne, for all your comments here to us, and everybody else who joined us. We really appreciate it. Stay tuned, a lot more webinars coming, and looking forward to being of service as always. So gonna say goodbye, and John, we'll talk soon, and everybody else will talk soon as well.
And I hope everybody's staying safe and getting the best they can out of this coming weekend.
You got it. Cheers.